Big data is a big business buzzword, but are you actually using data to drive sales? Plus, the age old question of risk versus reward. Our experts share the biggest opportunities they see right now in digital marketing. But first, how entrepreneurship is a bit like baseball and how to make sure you're set up for success. Expert Connections starts now. Welcome to Expert Connections. I'm Julie Holton. Okay, so it's the bottom of the ninth. Bases are loaded, full count, 2 outs. Tell me, who's up to bat for you? Who's on your team? Now imagine instead of baseball, we're talking business. And instead of a tie game, we're talking about the unknown, like, say, a pandemic. Who is on your team? Are you set up for success? Joining me is attorney John Mashney from Foster Swift Law Firm. Hi, John.
Hey, Julie. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Okay, so John, you talk about entrepreneurship like it's a team sport. Tell us why.
Well, I think it's really easy when you're an entrepreneur or even in any organization to get caught up in what you can personally do, right? And you only have a certain amount of time, a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of resources. And if you want to grow and have success beyond just you being busy, right, you need to build a team of people. And I often say that building the team is the number one thing that you need to do before anything else. And once you build that team, the team then builds your organization, your business, or whatever it is. And so if you pick the best teammates and you find the right teammates, then you can have really whatever type of success you want. But if you're missing a key team member, then you're going to have a gap, you're going to have problems, you're going to be really in a tough spot, especially when unexpected things happen, like a pandemic or any other problem that pops up. So really, to me, building a team is the main thing that needs to be focused on as an entrepreneur or a business owner, or even if you're in or a part of any organization.
Absolutely. And I'm sure it's finding the right team members so that as you build your team, you're really adding people, adding their strengths. So you're one, not doing it all, but you really have the right people in the right places. So tell me about this starting lineup. And I hope you like baseball because I'm using this analogy, but it's springtime. So tell me about the starting lineup. Who do I need on the roster to make sure that I'm set up for success?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I talk about this with our clients all the time and business owners and entrepreneurs all of the time. Really, it depends on your business. So the members of the team depend on what you do, but there are certain members that you're going to be needing as part of your business no matter what. Like it's specifically business or even in nonprofits, right? You need a good accountant. You need an attorney. You need it very oftentimes an insurance agent, right? Oftentimes you also need a banker. And then thinking through, once you have those pieces in place, thinking what's specific to your business. You often need a marketing team or a PR team, right? And these can be internal or external. Speaking specifically about what I do in law, you don't just need one lawyer very oftentimes. There are different types of lawyers that you might need to talk to. And sometimes their services, if they're really good at what they do, they don't necessarily overlap, right? You might have an employment issue one day and then the next day a tax issue or intellectual property issue, right? Completely different disciplines, and you probably would need different lawyers for those specific roles. And it's just figuring out what's right for you. If someone's in the real estate industry, they're going to need a different team than if they're purely technology, right? Or if they're a technology startup. So it's really identifying the team that you need and then identifying who are the best people for those roles. Specifically, what are the strengths? Because if you can use the strengths of each member of the team, then you have a team full of strengths instead of you being good at one thing and then not as good or just mediocre at all of these other things. That's why it's so important. Pick the right team and get your team in place.
John, I remember when I was first launching my own business, I remember saying that I didn't want to have to learn things the hard way, right? Like who wants to learn by making mistakes? But truly my fear was not knowing what I didn't know. like I knew there were things I didn't know, but I didn't even know what those things were, if that makes sense. So what are some examples of this? What are some of the maybe unexpected times when you've seen businesses really wish that they already had that team of advisors in place, like you mentioned?
Well, I think it's, just speaking particularly in terms of legal, right? For me personally, not organizing your business properly, right? Not taking the proper formalities, not having agreements in place, or using agreements that don't do what you think they're going to do, right? I'm dealing with a situation just today where a business had an agreement and it didn't address any of the main things that could go wrong, and now they're really suffering the consequences from it. So you really do need to be very careful about the team that you put together and make sure that you have the right, people that you need, but then also the right people that are comfortable working with you. Because when something like a pandemic happens, you won't be able to say, oh, I got to find the person that can help me or find the people that can help me. You need to be in a position where they're just a phone call away. What do I do? How do I do it? And you already have the relationship built up, potentially a friendship, where even when times are tough, they're going to answer the phone and be willing to give some of their energy and resources to help you out. And it could be even someone that's very skilled at helping you in that particular situation.
Yeah, I think of the pandemic and how many small businesses in particular needed to find a banker, whether it was dealing with PPP loans, and of course, there were legal aspects to that as well and tax aspects. I think the pandemic is a great example of really needing those key people in place, kind of almost your personal team of advisors, if you will, but for your business.
There's no question. And very oftentimes, when you have those personal relationships, they can make the difference between success or failure of your business.
John, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts on this today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
For more resources from John and the attorneys at Foster Swift Law Firm, head to WLAJ.com and click Legal Connections. We've all heard the saying, no risk, no reward, but easier said than done. The pandemic is an example of a pure risk no one could control, like a tornado or a flood. Other risks, operational, financial, strategic, they come with big decisions to weigh. Joining me now are marketing connections experts, Jesse Flores of SuperWebPros, Tim Haynes of Symposia Labs, and Paul Schmidt of UnoDeuce Multimedia. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for having us.
Okay, so I'm looking at a panel of entrepreneurs. Some might say risk takers as business owners. You're also unique because you use your own expertise to grow your businesses as marketing experts. So I think there's a lot that our viewers can really learn from this topic. Tim, let's start with you. How do you take risks safely? Is that even a thing, a safe risk?
I don't know about you, but I love to run yellow lights from time to time. I think that risk is inevitably going to be connected with our risk tolerance. So safety sort of depends on your definition of risk tolerance. Great news though, digital has made risk a lot easier to take because we can measure the risk and also the reward. So if you've ever wondered, for example, like how does Amazon decide that the color of the button should be yellow instead of blue, that data is driving those sorts of decisions. And something as small as punctuation in a caption could make a very big difference in your marketing efforts. So yes, risk, reward, they are very much connected, but the great news is they're measurable these days.
Right. And you're not talking about like huge risk, because funny enough, some of us, like myself, I don't really consider myself to be a huge risk taker. But when it's a calculated risk and I can measure and see where that risk is going to take me, makes it a little bit easier. Jesse, do you find this to be true? Do you find that people are sometimes intimidated by digital marketing? I think of the businesses that had to pivot during the pandemic, and it seems like this huge world of digital marketing could sound scary or risky. What do you think?
Yeah, great question. And I think to Tim's point, data really helps. Like, look, there are different kinds of risks, right? If I were to close my eyes and go play in the street, like that's definitely really risky behavior, and it's a nonsensical risk. right? That's a very different thing than the kind of risk where if I were to wait at the crosswalk for the light to change, right? There's a chance, a car could run the light and I could still get hit, but the risk it's been de-risked because I put boundaries around the risk. And marketing and business in general is no different. If you have boundaries around the risk, then it becomes much easier to know, okay, when the light's green, then I go. Is there a chance that something could go wrong? Absolutely. There's always that chance, but the boundaries help. With digital in particular, having access to data and information makes it much easier to bound that risk. And in some cases, that's actually what intimidates people. So I'll give you an example. I decided to take out a billboard, let's say, to advertise my business. And the guy that sells me the billboard is like, this is great. Thousands of people drive by a day. And I feel really good because I know thousands of people drive by every day. And then eventually I hear somebody say, hey, I saw your billboard and I feel really great because the anecdotes are awesome. In digital, I might run an ad and see that 10,000 people saw this ad in 24 hours and nobody interacted. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I'm like, this is so risky. What am I doing, right? But that's actually a benefit and a proof that it works well, because now instead of spending $3,000 a month on an ad that may work, I know I just spent $50 on an ad and I saw it didn't work. So turn it off and move on to the next thing. And I think that's the real value of digital, is learning to think about testing, bounding the risk, and then knowing at the point at which you need to pull the parachute and get off, and knowing that, it's okay to lose a little bit. The lights just changed color. You have time to cross. Let's go ahead and move on.
Absolutely. Okay. So I love, Tim and Jesse, what you've both said about like diving in, taking these risks. But Paul, I'm coming to you next, because it seems like taking risks is only one part of this equation. How do you know when to ask for help, or when to, seek out perhaps a professional that can help you mine that data to make, decisions about your next steps? When do you seek help?
Well, as soon as you can. Honestly, it is okay to ask for help. We all know that organizations had to pivot and adapt and incorporate new technologies. Zoom, for anybody? Does that ring a bell?
Can we put that on our resumes now?
Yeah, I think so.
Skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we have to really think about, is the fact that with more Zoom meetings and more incorporating these new technologies, as Jesse mentioned, we have to probably turn to the folks that can help us manage those types of broadcasts, those types of meetings. And not only that, but with the media that's being created, instead of tasking somebody that's on your staff that's already overworked at this point in time, using that vendor partnership, those vendor relationships that you've built, so that you can use that media that you've captured and be able to repurpose it on the fly, and use those skills that you have in-house with what the vendor can help you provide. So those are the things that people have to really think about, because you're taking a risk in incorporating this new technology, or having to incorporate it, but always look for help. Always know that these folks that you've built relationships with, and that's what they do. Bring them in. You're all part of a ecosystem, all part of a team.
Absolutely. We hear it often said that we need to know when to stay in our lane, and when to bring in those that have the expertise that will help us with our businesses. Paul, Jesse, Tim, thank you so much for adding your insights to this today. To see more from our experts, head to WLAJ.com and click the link for Marketing Connections. One of the best ways to calculate risk and plan for growth is to harness your data. Tom Davenport, the director of research at the International Institute for Analytics, says organizations that use big data are able to reduce costs, which then leads to faster, better decision making. And when these businesses gauge customer needs and satisfaction, they can also create new products and services. Our Sales Connections expert, Shari Pash, joins us to dive deeper into this idea of using data to drive sales. Hi, Shari.
Hey, Julie. Another great topic to talk about today.
Shari, when it comes to numbers, many people either love them or hate them.
That is so true, Julie. Early in my sales career, I used to think my job was to smile and build those client relationships. And I learned early on my job involved numbers. It involved relationship building, but it was a numbers game. And data was my best friend during that. I always say that the knowledge Data is your knowledge. And so you've got to have data to make good sales strategy decisions.
Yes. Okay. So let's soften things for the haters out there who maybe just really hate it because they're not comfortable with it yet. Where do we begin? What kind of data do we start with?
Well, I think we want to gather the data that's going to drive our strategy and decisions, being very intentional on what we're gathering. And the type of data we want to gather, it's definitely sales focused for this particular discussion. So what I like to talk about is we need data that's going to let us know trends, what's working, what's not working. So as an example, I always say that we should be collecting the lead sources of our new clients and customers or new accounts, whatever you use to talk about there. It's important that we could run a report for all of last year. What generated our new revenue and our new accounts last year? Because we want to do more of what's working and not put our time and resources into areas that aren't developing. And what lead sources brought your higher revenue, which lead sources brought your lower revenue. So often we spend time in those lower revenue sources. So it really lets us define when we're looking to grow different market segments, different revenue streams, what was the lead source for those? So it's very important that we track our lead sources.
Absolutely. Where's the money coming from?
Exactly.
And sometimes we might think it's coming from one place, and we might find that when we put that pie chart together, there's a bigger piece of the pie coming from someplace else.
That is so true, because what can happen is your squeaky wheels, you think that's where a lot of it's coming from, but that's your lower revenue. So often it's doing that. So another thing is the prospect levels. I talk about squeaky wheels. Know your prospect and your client levels. If you don't have a system in place, I really recommend that you qualify who are your top accounts, your medium range, which is a good share of the business you do business with, and those maybe the lower level clients and customers that really are draining your resources for a very small amount of revenue. All customers are important, definitely. It's where do we spend our percent of time? Do we spend 80% in those higher levels, or do we flip it and do 80% in that lower level and 20% in the higher? So prospect levels are very important. We also want to look at our recruitment, our solicitation, our sales, whatever you call your activity. We want to look at our production activity. So we want to measure calls. We want to know, are we doing all follow-up repeat calls, or are we getting enough brand new companies or organizations called on as well? Do we have a goal for our virtual and outside appointments? Are we better on the phone? Are we better virtually? Are we better when we can be outside visiting with clients or customers in person? And what's the outcomes from each? This is where we build our trends of what works so we can replicate successful weeks or months. Doesn't that make sense? Instead of just each week figuring out what am I going to do?
Yeah. And to know where all of this work is going. Shari, I want to ask, you've brought up some really great points of the data that we should be tracking. How do we begin to set goals and benchmarks? Like, for instance, how do you decide what goal it is? Like, once you have some of this data,
Yes.
where do you go from here? How do you start to use the data?
You start to use the data once you have a sales team tracking their production. If I see I had 5 inquiry calls come in, I want to know that 4 proposals went out. So you want to start benchmarking by first running and tracking all of your activity, your forecasts, your inquiries, all the different ways that you measure business. Each of us does that differently. And then from there, you need to put a stretch goal on that. But you've got to get a benchmark of where you're at. So if you're not currently tracking data from even your lost business reports and things, start collecting this data today. I have a lot of clients I work with that aren't collecting. Start today. Going forward, you'll have something to measure, and that's how you begin to set your benchmarks. But it's really important that we measure our goal and then our actuals so that we know if we're meeting. But I use them as not measurements and what's working, what's not. I want to know the trends of what is happening with when you have an end of a week and it's been so busy. What did I do? We need to know exactly so you know what worked that week.
Imagine that those benchmarks, and as you're starting to track that information, it also will show you where your top prospects are, where your members are, and how to grow from there. So Shari, that brings me to one last thing that I want to talk about with you today, which is the tool that you use to track all of this.
Your foundation is your contact management system. Whatever you call your customer database. database, basically. This is where we're tracking lead sources, your fiscal year of your clients. You want to know when their money starts over, so you know when to get in their budget. This is how we build our relationship and watch those trends. So the CRM is really critical piece for that. And there's so many strategies with that, fields we should be tracking. So
and
definitely.
Shari, I know you've put together an entire separate training video on CRM. We've made that available for you on our website. So to see more from Shari, including her training video on CRM, head to WLAJ.com and click the link for Sales Connections. When it comes to work-life balance, has your equilibrium felt maybe just a bit off? Even those who work for employers with great flex time options, paid time off, and other perks say that adapting during the pandemic has been a struggle. I'm joined by Nancy DeBoer of She Leads Michigan, former mayor of Holland. Nancy, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. This is an exciting program.
Nancy, even without COVID, creating that work-life balance can be really tough, especially for working parents.
It really can. You know, many of the rhythms of life have been kind of disruptive. And now we have all these rhythms happening at the same time, and they're all at home on top of each other. And it's not often pretty or harmonious.
No, everything's changing. And it's times like this that it's so important to connect and to learn from each other. So today, Nancy, you have the story of one woman who's balancing work, family, and faith. It's our Heart and Soul Connections.
I'm here with Erin Mercino. And Erin, I can't help but wonder, you know, how do you do it as a successful attorney, married to a successful attorney, raising 5 sons? What helps you stay like centered and balanced as a person through all of that?
Only God. So only through the grace of God. And I'm not shy about asking God for more grace when it's needed. And also finding time for spiritual disciplines, waking up in the morning and centering your day. I wake up and I pray. And throughout the day, my children and I pray together. And then at night, every night we do family dinner together. And we all sit down and we talk about our day. We begin our dinner with a prayer, asking for God's grace. And it's just a wonderful time to have a true conversation with each other, talk about challenges that we're facing, and our gratitude for blessings that the day has brought as well.
Wow, that is beautiful. And I'm sure that brings a heart-to-heart connection with your family and with each other. That's great. How do you switch worlds? Like one day you're presenting a case at the Supreme Court, and the next you're changing diapers and organizing laundry. Do you have any tips for us about all that?
Well, I think it's easier to actually see the importance of my work as an attorney, because when I submit a brief and it's to the United States Supreme Court, it's published and it looks very fancy and you can see the hard work that's poured into it. But I think it's more difficult as a mom to credit yourself for all of the heart and soul that you pour into the work with your kids every day. And it's just as important, actually, probably more important. And nothing that we do as moms, as women, is insignificant. Every act of mercy that we give toward our children is so good and so wonderful. So I think, taking time to make sure that you understand, just how important the work you do as a parent is.
That's true. And that's what we have to do in our minds, right? And also your youngest son, Jacob, is 2. And I understand that pregnancy with him was unique. Could you tell us about Jacob?
Sure. So when I went for my first ultrasound with Jacob, the ultrasound technician seemed like something was a bit off. And then I was put in a room with my doctor, and she explained that there were significant abnormalities in the ultrasound. And she thought that Jacob either had trisomy 18 or trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome. And so I emailed all of my friends and said, please, could you help me and pray for this baby? and pray for me too. And I immediately got back an email from one of my friends who I served on a school board with. And she happened to be an OBGYN. And she said, let me help you. Let me be your doctor. And from there on out, it was just such an outpour of God's grace. So Jacob did have Down syndrome, and he wasn't actually expected to live. It looked like he had some significant issues with his heart. Throughout the pregnancy, everything cleared up. So as we went from ultrasound to ultrasound, the diagnosis just continued to improve, which was such a tremendous blessing. And through that trial, I really believe just we were called to even a closer relationship with God. And I felt like God kept whispering in my ear to read Judges 6:12, which is, God is with you, you mighty warrior. And as a mom, I don't necessarily feel like I'm nailing it every day, especially during the pandemic with, homeschooling and all of these wonderful challenges that we've been facing. But just God is with us. And it's also something that I put on all of my oral arguments that I do in the corner. I just write, God is with you. And I believe that gives me strength and hope, and it just opens my eyes to the tremendous blessings that God gives us, even when it's something that we don't expect.
That is so beautiful, and such a source of strength for all of us, for you to share your vulnerabilities, Erin, and for God to have shown up to walk with you through all of this. We thank you so much for sharing your story. Julie,
thank you.
and we move on to Julie.
Thank you, Nancy, for this interview. To watch the full hour-long episode of She Speaks featuring Erin and her family, head to our website, WLAJ.com, and click Heart and Soul Connections. Finally today, a local children's book author is on a mission to share a valuable message. Vicki Hamilton Allen recently released a book called The Itchy Secret, which spent several weeks as one of the top-rated books in its category on Amazon.
The very name, The Itchy Secret, comes from the feelings that one has when they're holding in a secret that perhaps maybe they shouldn't have. And so it feels like anxiety, it feels like guilt, it feels like shame. As a child, I was struggling with these itchy secrets. And as an adult, when I released them, I realized that there was a healing in sharing. And what I wanted to do was to help children at a much earlier stage release their itchy secrets so they had an opportunity to feel whole. I chose a lion as the main character for several reasons. Number one, a lion is brave and strong, king of the jungle, full of courage. And I wanted to demonstrate, first and foremost, that even those full of courage can still have a tough time. And secondly, I wanted to be able to demonstrate emotions in another way, and the mane seemed a great way to do that.
To learn more about The Itchy Secret, including a look at a new podcast Vicki will be launching soon, head to WLAJ.com and click Expert Connections. Thank you for joining us for Expert Connections. I'm Julie Holton. We'll see you back here next Monday.
Expert Connections is executive produced by mConnexions Marketing Agency in collaboration with Foster Swift Law Firm. Strategic Solutions for Growth. SuperWebPros, Symposia Labs, UnoDeuce Multimedia, and She Leads Michigan. A special thank you to our Style Connections partners, Polka Dots Boutique, The Standard Spa, and Beauty by Wilder. Visit our Style Spotlight online at WLAJ.com/Expert Connections.